So, good morning, troopers. To announce our first speakers for the opening of this conference, I'm going to broadly steal a meme and imagine this is a car, and you know this bad boy can fit so many misconfigurations in it. Okay, great. Everybody knows what this will be about now. So we have Alex and Phil talking about one more thing we can do with ADCS. Give it up for both.
So, perfect. Mic's working. Thank you for having us. It's really a great honor to be here. I think the first time we were at Troopers was 2023, and since then we were here every year, and now even on stage. So it's a great honor. Thank you, and thank you for coming to our talk, ESC17, using ADCS to attack HTTPS-enabled WSUS clients. I think usually when looking at Active Directory or researching in general, you most often approach this and look at one service or one protocol or one type of Active Directory. And we will take a little bit different approach. We will take a look at what happens when you combine two services or even more in Active Directory and what interesting attack paths arise from this. So hopefully you have fun. Let's go. One word about ourselves. I'm Alex. I'm a security consultant at Digitrace. We're a small company located in Cologne. My daytime job is pen testing, and a few years ago I looked at Active Directory, looked at Active Directory security, and somehow got stuck there. Since then I'm basically doing Active Directory all the time, and yeah. When my day job is over, I turn off my company laptop and turn on my private machine and continue Active Directory research or poking at Active Directory. I am, for example, maintaining netexec along with some other awesome guys, some French, some American, some all over the world. It's a community project. I also poke at other things, WSUS. We will talk about this a little bit more during the talk. And I've also worked on Even Monitor. That's a project monitoring event logs on Active Directory, and also released a vulnerability about Active Directory yesterday. So if you happen to administrate Active Directory, you might want to take a look at that as well. Yeah, that about myself.
Hello from my side as well. I'm Phil. Working at the same company as Alex. Actually, I'm sort of his team lead in our small security team. When I'm not at work, I'm definitely on the nerd side of life. I have some weird kind of fetish for Linux home administration, which I satisfy in my home environment. It's mostly not security focused at that time. Doing basic everyday Linux admin tasks. I somehow have taken a like in that. But I don't always sit at the computer. I also go outside. I think you have to mention that here on such a technical conference. Yeah, at work, I'm also doing penetration testing. Mostly internal infrastructure, but basically everything that goes in the broad topic of security consulting, whatever the client asks, we try to answer as good as we can. And what I'd like to stress here is that most often we don't have time for research on the job. Our work is helping clients, doing assessments, and working with what many of you and many other great people have presented at conferences around the world, at Troopers in previous years. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, as one says. But sometimes we take a look at stuff that we read, and we think, oh, maybe this person didn't really think this through all to the end. Maybe there's something that you can add on that to make an even more interesting thing out of it. And this is what we want to talk about today. I think most of you probably know about ADCS. For those of you who might not know, we will give a short introduction, because this will be important for an understanding for the rest of the talk. And we'll also talk about Windows Server update services and recent or more historic attacks on that. And then we will combine these two things, and have a look at what comes out of that. Of course, as every good offensive talk, we will try to have a live demo. Let's cross fingers and hope the demo gods are in our favor and see how that goes. And we will, of course, also talk about what can be done against this thing that we found and what may lay in the future to have a further look at.
So, a short introduction to ADCS. ADCS stands for Active Directory Certificate Service, and I don't know, Microsoft has a thing to name services so long that you pretty much have to abbreviate them. So Active Directory Certificate Service is the public key infrastructure made by Microsoft, ADCS in short. And this is pretty much a classic PKI as you know them. It is used to to issue certificates for users, computers. For example, if you need to install a web server or even more complex stuff like securing LDAP traffic or MS SQL or whatever, PKI or ADCS got you covered. You can issue certificates with it. I think one or the most distinct thing about ADCS compared to other PKIs is that it uses certificate templates. Certificate templates are basically, like the name suggests, a blueprint for certificates. So you don't just request a certificate, you take a certificate template and that will force you, or that will determine what attributes this certificate has. For example, what you can do with it, what you can supply it for, in different aspects. So let's talk about these certificate templates. I think most of you probably look at certificate templates most of the time from Active Directory. Today, I think the bash is much more beautiful, and we will take a look at ADCS from the bash command line. This is certipy, or in this case, the certipy find module from netexec, because it just displays the attributes very well, in my opinion. So let's talk about these certificate templates. What can you do with these things? Who can request this? And what are the permissions on an ADCS template? These are all things that are defined on the template in Active Directory, and then you can request stuff. So what are these attributes? First off, there is a name. There's always a name. It's the template name. There's also a display name, but the template name is what you define, or what you how you can find the template. Then there are things like the certificate authority. In this case, this is just a lab environment, SOS CA, and this defines which certificate authority will issue the certificate. And there are also other attributes, for example, enabled. You can disable these templates, for example, to mitigate a vulnerability and disable a vulnerable template. So you can take a look at if these are valid, and you can request certificates from them or not. Then there's extended key usage, and I think this is one of the most interesting attributes of certificate templates, because this will define what you are allowed to do with this certificate. So when you request a certificate, there is a key usage, and the ADCS tells you, okay, you can do these things with this certificate now. Then there are also the permissions, and this is also pretty important. At the bottom, you can see who can administrator the certificate template, so who has full control, who is the owner, and who has write privileges over this template. But there are also the enrollment privileges, and this is pretty important for attackers, because this defines who can request such a certificate with this template. I think in this case, the domain users can have enrollment rights, so everyone in the domain can just go to the ADCS server and say, hey, please give me a certificate with this certificate template, and the ADCS server will say, here you go, have fun with it. So, in 2021, SpectreOps released their white paper, Certified Pre-Owned, and they dove into this huge structure in ADCS and Active Directory, and looked at how an attacker could use ADCS to compromise environments or escalate privileges. And there's a lot of interesting content in there, so give it a read if you haven't. From this, the domain escalation techniques arose. These were at the beginning ESC1 to ESC8, so escalation 1 to escalation 8, and they lay out paths how you can attack ADCS and Active Directory with it. So these focus on these certificate templates and look at the attributes and what you need or what you can do with certain attributes to gain control over the environment. And after they released it, the community found even more and conducted even more analysis on this. And we were up to ESC16 by now. And today, or we introduced ESC17 with the next attack. So before continuing, I think it's worth to look at least one of these escalation techniques to better get an understanding how these attacks work. I think the ESC1 attack is one of the most powerful and still most easy to understand attacks. You can get a domain admin in pretty much one command, and it's super powerful. So let's take a look what you need to get an ESC1 certificate template. First off, the most important attribute is the enrollee supplies subject. If this flag is enabled, the certificate requester can just supply any subject in the certificate request for which this certificate will also be valid. So for example, you could go to the ADCS server and say, hey, I'm Alex, please give me a certificate, and please also issue this to the domain administrator. And all of a sudden, you have a certificate where this is valid for the domain administrator, which is kind of hard. Then there's the extended key usage, which is also pretty important, and ESC1 explicitly defines this or requires client authentication. So why do we need client authentication? Let's say we have found a certificate template and requested such a certificate for the domain administrator, and then we want to authenticate with it to the domain. So you can go to the domain controller and say, hey, we got a certificate for the domain administrator, please authenticate myself. And if the extended key usage has some form of client authentication in there, the domain controller says, yeah, let's go, you're now domain administrator. We also need permissive enrollment rights. So if we can't enroll the certificate template, we can't request a certificate. So we need to be able to enroll it, and here, for example, the domain users are allowed, so everyone in the domain can enroll such a certificate. And last but not least, there are some mitigations against this. For example, manager approval is one flag. If this is set, then every issued certificate must be approved by someone, and this basically stops the entire attack because you can't auto-enroll a certificate, and someone needs to approve it, and hopefully no one approves a certificate for a domain administrator. When combining all of these things, we have a certificate template that is vulnerable to ESC1. So the entire attack is basically, hey, ADCS server, you have this certificate template, and the enrollee supplies subject flag is set. So please give me a certificate for the domain administrator. And since we have client authentication, we are also allowed to use this for authentication. And we can just go to the domain controller and say, hey, I'm the domain admin, please create a new user, add me to the domain administrators group, whatever you like. You basically have full control over the domain now. So how would you restrict such a certificate template? You go to a company, you see this, and they ask you, hey, how can I mitigate this attack? And the natural choice would be, okay, we have these four these attributes that define a template. Let's just mitigate one of these so we can hopefully mitigate the vulnerability. What could you do? You could disable enrollee supplies subject. That would mitigate the vulnerability immediately because you can't supply an arbitrary domain name or user anymore. In this case, or sometimes companies tell us, okay, sorry, we can't disable this because we need to enroll certificates for other users or other, most often I think, other computer accounts. So we have one server that does the enrollment and this just distributes the certificate, so we can't disable this. The next idea would be, okay, extend the key usage. We said that we need client authentication. So can we do something about this? Can we just disallow client authentication and this is good then? We'll see. We could also restrict permissive enrollment rights. For example, if just the domain administrators or enterprise administrators can enroll such a certificate template, so what, they are already domain admin. This would be fine as well, but sometimes this is just not possible. Or we could also restrict the auto-enrollment. So if we enable a manager approval, then you can't auto-enroll the certificate and template anymore. So this would basically also be mitigated. But this is difficult because sometimes you have to enroll a lot of certificates, and clicking approve on every one of these is sometimes just not feasible. Okay, so we thought restricting the EKU. Is this worth? Can we mitigate the ESC1 vulnerability with this? So if the EKU allows client authentication, this is bad, right? Because we can just go to the domain controller and authenticate as a legitimate way, similar to NTLM or Kerberos. And what about PK-init client authentication? This is pretty much equally bad. This is the client authentication in green. We can just use PK-init, which is some Kerberos authentication stuff with certificates. It's pretty much the same. Then any purpose and no EKU. This is even worse because now you can do everything with it, even like everything you want. Any purpose tells it already. So the last option, is it okay if we just allow server authentication? This is basically then just a TLS certificate now. You can't go to the domain controller and authenticate with it. Is this fine? Is this okay if we allow people to issue certificates for arbitrary servers if the only thing you can do is establish a TLS server with it?
And I just realized we didn't provide the source for this meme. That's not our own idea. It has been posted by Scalesec on Twitter a few years ago.
So shout out to him for this nice meme we adapted. Yeah, thank you, Scalesec. Okay.
Yeah, but before diving deeper into ADCS, let's just talk about what is WSUS and what are the attacks that have been discovered about this in the past. WSUS, as we would say in English, or as I think is the far more superior and easier rolling off the tongue version, WSUS in German. So we might have some WSUS slipping in this talk. I'll try to stick with the English pronunciation, but I can't guarantee that this works every time. What is WSUS? Many of you may have heard about this. Basically, it's a proxy service for Windows updates. And the abbreviation stands for Windows Server Update Service. But it doesn't only provide updates for Windows Server products, but also for many different other things, in particular Windows client operating systems. So basically, a company will install WSUS in the infrastructure, configure it in a way so that clients and servers speak with it, ask it for updates, and then the admins can control which updates are prioritized, which updates may be held back. Yeah, it's basically a nice way to configure updates without always directly talking with the online Microsoft infrastructure. WSUS is configured on the clients, WSUS clients, as I said, that may be server operating systems and clients as well, via group policies. Here we can see the registry keys that are set through these group policies. Basically, WSUS is an HTTP service running somewhere inside your local infrastructure, default port 8530, and you set these registry keys, tell the client, yeah, please, from now on, request your updates from this infrastructure, and then everything will work. Yeah, and WSUS, just by the way, is deprecated. Microsoft told so in 2024. They said, yeah, they won't provide any more updates for this. It is an old technology. It will not be developed in the future. So why bother? Why are we here in 2026 and talking about something that has been deprecated 2 years ago? Because so many other kind of things are also deprecated. You may have heard about RC4 most recently, and probably about many of these other things. And then you go back in your own infrastructure, if you're a Windows administrator, or if you're a pen tester, an attacker, you go in company infrastructures of your customers, you have a look at this type of stuff, and I'm sure every one of you has recently seen at least one of these things. And this is why we're here. We think that WSUS will stay with us for at least a few years, because many companies so heavily depend on it. Especially in Germany, where on-premise hosting is quite, the way that everybody wants it to work. We are not so cloud-native country. Might have to do with the internet, I don't know. But many companies prefer on-premises hosting, and WSUS is the on-premises way of doing local updates. And attacks on this aren't new. The first attack has been presented in 2015, and over the years, this basic first attack, which was a machine-in-the-middle attack on the client-server communication, has been updated. Then there was a little pause between 2020 and 2025, and from then on, things started to take up a little bit, and it became more interesting again, which led us to today, where we are giving this talk, maybe putting the next step on this timeline. But first, let's talk about the initial attack. Originally discovered by Context Information Systems, Paul Stone and Alex Chapman presented it at Black Hat USA more than 10 years ago. They reverse engineered the protocol between the WSUS client and the server. Basically, it's an HTTP protocol, as I said. I think it's XML, SOAP-based. The client asked the server, hey, do you have any update information for me? Is there anything new that I maybe should install? And then the server might say, yeah, I have metadata about updates. These 3 updates can be installed. But that's not all. The server also serves the actual update content. And these updates must be Microsoft signed. So yeah, we can close the laptop, go home, everything is secure, right? Microsoft signed binaries cannot easily be spoofed. But it turns out, and they found it in 2015 already, there's sort of a lolbin, not really a lolbin, because it is not pre-installed in Windows operating systems, but it is shipped by Microsoft and signed by Microsoft, which is the sysinternals tool suite. I think most of you know it. And one tool in this tool suite is psexec, which can be used to execute arbitrary commands. And you can configure it in a way that it takes the command not only over network, but you can provide it as a command line argument. And then if you make a malicious update, a malicious Windows update out of this, this code gets executed on the client with system privileges. This is basically what they found in 2015. You can specify a custom command, you have code execution on the client, and they also provided POC tooling, which they called WSuspect. It's a GitHub project, it's still online, and you could, in theory, use it, but it's more than 10 years old. It's based on Python 2, and you really, in 2026, should no longer be running Python 2 in your environment, just as you probably shouldn't deprecate utilities, but that's another story. What are the prerequisites for this attack? The Windows server, Windows Update server, must be using HTTP. That's what everyone said at that time. If it's using HTTPS, it's secure. And you must have some way of hijacking the traffic. You must sit between the client and the server. That's like every machine-in-the-middle attack works. There might be various different kinds of ways to achieve that. Think of ARP spoofing on a local network segment. You are at an internal pentest assessment. Stick your pentest laptop in the client network. That might be what you can be doing. You could also try DNS poisoning with tooling such as Responder or something else. You could also look at the more modern approach of injecting IPv6 traffic in a network that isn't fully IPv6 ready. MITM6 comes to mind. And I'm sure there's many other ways that you can think of how to go in between the client and the server and hijack the traffic. That's basically what you need to do. As I said, this attack has been further developed over the years. In 2017, Marcio Almeida developed WSUXploit, which is more or less the original tooling, but a fully weaponized version that you can start and run and execute arbitrary commands. And then in 2020, the company GoSecure picked up on this topic. And they started a series of blog posts. More of them I will cover in the next slides. The first one, they released a tool called PyWSUS, which was very important for Alex as well, because it is a Python re-implementation of the WSUS server. Not of every aspect and every detail, but it's more than just a one-shot exploit development platform. It's a vehicle for powerful attack research, an attack framework that they used and that others can use to analyze this infrastructure. And then in 2025, some lazy pen tester came around and said, I need to configure ARP spoofing manually. I need to craft a malicious update. I need to generate the payload every time. That is so annoying. Can't I do anything about it? And Alex started working on this and released WSUX in version 1.0 at the time, putting everything together. So basically, it's a one-shot tool that you start. It automatically configures ARP spoofing and all the nice stuff around and yeah, tries to make it as easy as possible. Completely different approach that I won't go into detail, but it's important to note for the whole WSUS attack story is what we call the red teamer approach. Think of some way you compromise the infrastructure and you manage to compromise the WSUS server. And then a red teamer, a malicious attacker as well, might try to deliver updates through the WSUS server to their victims. This has been first discussed in 2017. A tool W-suspendu, or maybe W-suspendu, because it's a French product, has been developed. You see, the French people have that as well with W. I think still the German is superior. It's a PowerShell script for injecting malicious updates into the WSUS database, and then they sit in the database, and the next time the client comes around, you will fetch the update, install it, and there you have your code execution again. This has been reiterated over the years. In 2018, WSUS was presented, 2022, Sharp WSUS. It's basically all the same kind of tooling, just in more modern ways. Sometimes it's targeted more towards command and control infrastructures for red teamers. As I said, nothing that is important for today, but that has been going on as well in the WSUS research landscape. And as I said, GoSecure didn't only write one blog post, did only one research. They took their PyWSUS tooling for further experiments, and in late 2020 found CVE 2020-1013. A low privilege escalation method on Windows clients that use WSUS. This works basically the following way. As an attacker, you somehow managed to achieve low privilege persistence on a machine, and you are in a user session. You can then configure the proxy server for this user session, which can be done with low privileges, and then you can run a PyWSUS-based local proxy server, point your user-configured proxy to localhost, and deploy whatever Windows updates you may like. Next time the client requests updates via WSUS, it will install this local update, and there you go, you have local privilege escalation. And this was the first time that an attack also targeted HTTPS-enabled WSUS, because not only could you, at that time, configure the current user proxy, but also you could install a certificate, custom certificate, in user local certificate store. And yes, at that time, WSUS took not only the current session proxy, current user proxy, and also the local current user certificate store, and took them into account when dealing with the update infrastructure. And this was exactly how Microsoft fixed it. This is a done vulnerability. You can't exploit it any longer, I'm sorry, because yeah, user-provided information is no longer taken into account when talking with the WSUS server. And in 2020 came part 3 of the GoSecure research, which which left the older attack surfaces behind and talked more about what was hip at the time, NTLM relaying. Because the client, when requesting update, of course, authenticates against the WSUS server in some way. It all happens automatically. You don't really realize it when just normally using a Windows client. But yeah, there's authentication going around, and as you probably know, you can use this, you can relay it to other services, and because WSUS is HTTP-based, it's actually a quite powerful technique for gathering authentication attempts, because HTTP-based authentication attempts are very valuable for NTLM relay attacks. And they found out that sometimes when requesting WSUS updates, the client will use the current user session authentication, and sometimes the machine account. They couldn't really state why this happens, at when time, at what time. Yeah, but it is sometimes one thing, sometimes it's the other. And depending on what you might try to achieve as an attacker, the user session might be more interesting, or perhaps the machine account, depending on which device you are currently targeting. But again, this was limited to HTTP-based WSUS, because you couldn't just intercept the encrypted traffic running over HTTPS. And I think you may already see where this might be going. But at that time, until recently, the mitigation talked about by almost everyone was turn on HTTPS, and then it's secure, trust us. honestly, that's not only what researchers said, but what Microsoft said themselves. Turn on HTTPS, it's what we recommend against this attack. We have said so since day one. The WSUS documentation states, yeah, you should really enable it. It makes everything more secure. So WSUS with HTTPS is secure, yeah? Well, we have already seen GoSecure showed that this might not always be the case. And then last year, Austin Kuhns from TrustedSec came around, wrote a new blog post. The full title is WSUS is sus, anti-LM relay attacks in plain sight. And he reiterated on what GoSecure had already found, that you could use WSUS traffic for relaying. And he did so against the LDAP protocol, which might be the most interesting target. And he wrote his blog post from top to bottom. We read it. He started with HTTP relay, which was what we are already familiar with. And then he stated that, yeah, of course, you can also relay HTTPS traffic against LDAP. You just need a certificate from this ADCS server, which provides enrollee supplies subject and server authentication. And I read that and thought, hold up, that's interesting. I had a look at Alex, said, what did he just wrote? Did he just mention that you can have a new attack path against WSUS that changes basically the security premise that everyone was talking about, that it is secure when you use HTTPS? And we think, yeah, that in fact he has done so. And he has found something that maybe Austin didn't realize at the time how big it was, in our opinion at least. As I said, he did something that was very similar to ESC1. He used this ADCS certificate template that allowed to specify an arbitrary subject, enrollee supply subject, as Alex explained, provided the name of the WSUS server, and requested a certificate for this server. And in contrast to all attacks that came before, you don't need client authentication for that, because it's only a simple TLS certificate used to identify an HTTPS server in that case. So you need server authentication as the EKU. And I think many red teamers will disagree with this. They really like relay attacks because it doesn't leave a footprint on the client, it's more stealthy. But we as pen testers, where we can be a little bit more noisy, we prefer the code execution approach, which is why we took Austin's research and started to have a look how we could integrate this into the existing tooling, edX tooling for that matter, the WSUX tool, and achieve code execution in HTTPS-enabled WSUS infrastructures.
So, perfect. We now know how to issue certificates, and we've talked about the WSUS servers. And basically, Austin did pretty much all of our work. He turned WSUS traffic, which was HTTPS encrypted, and showed us how we can use ADCS to request a TLS certificate and then decrypt the traffic. So, can we apply this to the same old WSUS serving malicious update trick? Yes, we can. And this is pretty much what we did. Not so much new. First, as an attacker, you come into an environment and you need to know first where is the WSUS server. So the first step for this attack is we need to identify the WSUS server. And if we have so, we can then identify a template. We need a certificate template with these attributes, so in release supply subject. And now we only need server authentication and not client authentication anymore. If we have found such a certificate template, we can go ahead, request a certificate for the WSUS server and use this with WSUX to apply the same old MITM attack on the WSUS traffic. So we need to hijack the WSUS traffic, as Phil explained, for example, through UPS poisoning, what WSUX does, or DNS poisoning, or what suits your needs. And then we just serve a malicious update. And since we have a TLS certificate, we can also spawn a web server with TLS. And if we have done so and the client requested the update, we are in, we have hacked the machine and profit. So let's go through these steps. There are a few ways how we can identify a WSUS server. First, as we have explained, the WSUS server is set via a GPO. And since the GPOs are readable by pretty much anyone, all domain users, and stored on the domain controller, I think, at least my opinion, this is the easiest way. You can just go to the domain controller, download the GPOs, and analyze them. If you find a registry key that the WSUS server is specified, you know where the WSUS server is located. Austin also wrote a nice tool that sniffs simply the network traffic in your subnet. So you can analyze, if there are clients on your subnet, you can analyze the traffic in there and see if any clients already request WSUS, so updates from the WSUS server. And if so, we have also successfully found the WSUS server. And of course, if you have like a normal penetration test and maybe the client gave you a laptop and you have already access to a Windows machine, you can just look into the registry. It's defined via a registry key, so yeah, that's, I think, the easiest way if you have access. Down below, you can see this in WSUS. We will have a demo. Hopefully this works. But WSUS has implemented the GPO approach. So WSUS with a domain user will query the GPOs and parse them for you, so you can easily identify the WSUS server. The next step, we need a certificate template. And we've already talked about this. This is super similar to ESC1. And we basically have to look for supplies in release subject. If this flag is set and we can enroll it, we just need the server authentication EKU. So the only difference really here, of course, manager approval must also be turned off because otherwise we can't request certificates. The only difference being that we don't need client authentication, just server authentication, which is pretty neat. And if we have found such a certificate template, we can go ahead and use Certify. I think this is the go-to tool, the standard in Active Directory, maintained by LY4K. And it's a Python, basically a Python tool with which you can do all sorts of ADCS stuff. You can just request a certificate, and if we have this certificate, then we just have to convert it to PEM because WSUS only parses PEM. And in this request, we just supply the DNS name of the WSUS server, so we have a legitimate TLS certificate for the server. With that certificate, we can start the actual attack. So I'm a lazy guy. I don't want to do this all manually, so I wrote WSUS, and this will pretty much do everything for you. As you can see, you just need to specify the WSUS server, the DNS name, supply the TLS certificate, so WSUS can spawn a TLS server, and supply the target client machine, so the IP address points to the Windows target. And in the next step, WSUS will generate a user and password for you, just randomized, and then generates a huge amount of PowerShell script, but this basically just creates this user on the target machine, adds it to the local administrators group, and then disables local account token filter policy, so you can actually use this local administrator from the network side, because otherwise you won't get an elevated token over the network and you can't use it. But yeah. When started, WSUS will turn on ARP spoofing, route the traffic to our, does some network magic. It's pretty complicated in my opinion. But yeah, it basically provides all the intercepting and rerouting magic for you. And then we have to wait. Usually, the default in Active Directory and WSUS setups is that I think they request updates every 23 hours. So hopefully this is the default and you can just wait, and after a day, latest after a day, the clients will hopefully request updates and then come to your machine. If that happens, you should see the traffic. WSUS, the client will request, hey, are there any new updates? It requests our HTTP server, so we can just say, hey, yes, we have a lot of new nice updates, one of which is PSExec. Please download it from our server, and here's another beautiful PowerShell script. Install PSExec with this PowerShell script, please. If so, and the client installs our beautiful update, we are in. profit. We have a local administrator. You can use netexec or whatever you like in Packet and authenticate to the machine. If you can see, the pwned label shows you we have administrative privileges, so we can dump the SAM database or LSA secrets, whatever you like. You have full control over the machine. So we have a short demo for you. Let's pray to the demo gods that this works. And I'm trying to duplicate my screen so you can actually see my lab.
Yes.
Wonderful, that works. We have here a subnet, local subnet with a few Windows servers, basically Active Directory in small. You can see here some Windows servers. Here's our Windows client. As you can see, the WSUS server is configured to use HTTPS. Supposedly secure, like everyone said, HTTPS at secure.macam.sccm.let. This is basically our WSUS server on the local subnet, and on the right side you can see there are no additional users besides some pre-configured one and Eve, the domain administrator. So let's start the attack. First, we will need to see if there is a WSUS server on the subnet and check if we can find someone. As I've told you, WSUS will do this for you with some low-privileged user, Bob. And if we discover this, we see, oh yes, it actually found a GPO. Here's the WSUS server, but it's using HTTPS, so we need the new attack path. Here's the URL, so HTTPS, like we saw in the Windows client, configured in that machine. So the next step is, how can we find such a certificate template? We have gone through the certify library and implemented a new ESC method, ESC17, and this will find this for you. I'm using netexec because I like the netexec, and it's, in my opinion, easy to use, but you can just use certify. Fortunately, LY4K, I got in touch with him and merged the pull request yesterday, so this is already available. And then you hopefully see, or as the defender, not hopefully, but well, as an attacker, such a certificate template. It is enabled, so we can use it. The client authentication is turned off, so we can't use it for EC1. The in-release supply subject is enabled, so we can supply arbitrary DNS names and users and whatever we like. And yeah, manager approval is turned off as well. And the enrollment rights grant us for domain computers and authenticated users, so basically everyone in the domain can request this template. So we can go ahead. We know which template we have to use, so we can use certify to request such a template. Basically, this just uses the template and says, hey, please give me a certificate for it, and as alternative name, please use the DNS name secure.macam.sccm.lab. Okay. Demo gods are not nice because it looks like ADCS went down. I can try to reboot the DC. No.
Of course.
Of course. Maybe I can reset it and then hopefully it works. Sometimes, the problem is sometimes when booting from disk, I think the revocation list goes down and the ADCS server now says, hey, I don't have a revocation list, please don't do this. I won't give you a certificate. Okay, that did not work. Do we have some time left? Hopefully, maybe.
A little bit, yeah.
Should we try? Should we skip?
Do you still have the certificate from earlier attempts, or have you reverted the machine?
I think I have reverted the machine, yeah.
Yes, of course we have reverted the machine.
Because to have everything in the original attempt state, and it works. Maybe we continue with the mitigations and try it when the DC is back up.
So. Yeah.
Okay. Then let it reboot. It's not the fastest one. So.
Yes.
Okay. Here you go.
So if we might have seen, this will work. It will show that the client can be attacked. So the question now is, what can we do about this? This is what we wanted to tell you. We wanted to tell you, yeah, WSUS is deprecated. It's unlikely that anything will happen in the product itself. Microsoft could limit updates to certain certificates. Microsoft could implement certificate pinning and protect against machine-in-the-middle attacks. They could do so, but it's unlikely because this is so deprecated. Why should they care? And this is actually what we wrote in our blog post when we published this let's call it research. But turns out they actually did. And I think nobody really realized. This is from documentation of the configuration manager, somewhere hidden deep inside the documentation, starting in configuration manager 2103, so some update in 2021 that was. You can further increase the security of HTTPS scans against WSUS by enforcing certificate pinning. To fully enable this behavior, add certificates to your WSUS servers to the new Windows Server Update Services certificate store on your clients, and ensure certificate pinning is enabled through client settings. The last part is enabled by default, so if you add the certificate to the Windows Server Update Services certificate store on your WSUS clients, you could now be secure. And again, I had a look at Alex and said, hold up, have you ever heard about this certificate store? And we both hadn't. I don't know if you have. I think it has gone pretty much under the radar, but it is there. If you have a look at your client device, there is a new certificate store. I don't know since when, probably a few years by now. And you can just upload the certificate in this store. And in fact, it is secured. So yeah, it is available since 2021. And probably it has been caused by the GoSecure research, in which they did this CVE attack, the local privilege escalation. So big shout out to them. They actually did quite a lot to improve the security of WSUS. But it's hidden somewhere in configuration manager documentation, as I said. So it's not easy to find. It needs manual setup to really work. You need to install the certificate in the certificate store. Unfortunately, this cannot be done by GPO. You need to write some script yourselves to install it throughout your infrastructure. But it is important to note it is not limited to configuration manager or SCCM infrastructures, as you might call them as well. In general, it works with every WSUS installation out there. And this is how it would look. You have this new certificate store called Windows Server Update Services, and on the top you can see that we imported the certificate in there for the name of our WSUS server. And then if you try to request an update, the Windows client will show an error message. If you look up this error code on the internet, it will say something like invalid trust. So in fact, the certificate was detected as not being trusted. The update is rejected, and the attack will no longer work. So yeah, you could be secure in your WSUS infrastructure if you just install it and configure it correctly. It can be configured correctly, but it's not the default. And WSUS and probably many other management tools out there rely on PKI and certificates to be trustworthy. That is the backbone of trustworthy communication. And we think that if a single EKU misconfiguration, server authentication, can lead to remote code execution on client devices, that is a pretty huge thing. And which is why we think that this is not a one-shot weakness, vulnerability, whatever you might call it in WSUS, but a new ESC method. And this is why we call this ESC17. We believe in identification through classification. So everyone who audits their ADCS infrastructures can now search for such configuration risks, identify them, and think about them. Maybe try to mitigate them or say, oh no, our infrastructure is not affected by this. But it can be a conscious decision. The mitigations, if you find such a vulnerable template, are very similar to ESC1. We saw that restricting the EKU is not really a solution, because if you revert that back from server authentication to something like client authentication, you will again have ESC1. That doesn't help either. But you can modify the other parts that Alex talked about. You can restrict enrollee supply subject if you don't need it. Maybe you don't need everyone to supply arbitrary names for certificates. Maybe you do because you have a web server that wants to request certificates for many different domain names. So yeah, then you can go this approach, but maybe you can restrict the enrollment rights. Allow only this one specific Windows server to request the updates, and not all domain computers, not all domain users. Or if everything else doesn't work, maybe you can check the manager approval checkbox and not auto-enroll the certificate, but ask a real human being to check, not an AI, to check and to click, yes, I want to allow this update in the infrastructure, it is a legitimate certificate request. So what may lie in the future, now that we have talked about mitigation and that we have established that we would like to call this ESC17, there must something that can be done with this. You could have a look at other Microsoft protocols. We haven't done so. Maybe there's some more things in Configuration Manager, SCCM laying around, everything that is HTTP or HTTPS based. WinRM can be used over HTTPS. Maybe that could be an interesting target. And of course, there's many third-party software management tooling out there. Think of Kaseya, SolarWinds, Manage Engine, however they may be called. They all pretty much work the same as WSUS, and I think they have grown in interest since Microsoft said that WSUS will one day be out of service. It is deprecated. It will vanish at some point in the future. So maybe the other tooling will be even more interesting. And of course, there's always the just intercept the traffic and look for interesting data approach. Yes, with WSUS, we achieved code execution on clients. That is particularly interesting, but maybe it's just interesting enough to take apart a seemingly encrypted communication and have a look inside, see what lays. Because essentially, if you are able to enroll a certificate with server authentication, you can eavesdrop on any TLS-based communication that does not explicitly protect against it. Does not explicitly protect means does not use some kind of protection like certificate pinning. Yes, it is that simple. Basically, ESC17 is just a TLS MITM attack that we know since, I don't know, the 1990s probably. But in this particular case, it became more interesting because suddenly a MITM attack not only allowed to look at the traffic, but to influence the client directly. We achieved control over a client device, code execution on a client device. And this is one thing that is interesting, but maybe there's something completely different out there that we haven't thought about at all. So we think that ESC17 as a whole is a totally interesting approach, something that at least we have the feeling hasn't been talked about a lot, because with the ESC domain escalation techniques, everyone was focusing on how can you escalate to domain administrator directly, in the most direct approach. And of course, if you have an ESC1 certificate, that is a pretty direct approach. But yeah, maybe have a look at it, think about it. Maybe you can find something different, and tell us about it in the next years. Should we try if the demo works one more time? Because that is our last slide, in fact.
Yes. Okay. Please give me a certificate now.
You need to duplicate the screen.
Ah, right. Well,
but it works. I can already tell it works. We'll see a demo. There is the certificate.
Yeah, here you can see it. Maybe a bit low on screen. Let me. The secure PFX is there, so the revocation list is up and running again, and gave us a certificate. Beautiful. We just have to convert this, so we have the secure PAM certificate, and now we can start the attack using WSUS. We spin up the server. ARP spoofing is running. The user is was generated. PowerShell script. Everything works. We could now wait 23 hours, but this is maybe a bit too long. I wouldn't like to stay here for. I would like to sleep in the night. So what you can do is just request updates. This works as well. So if you have a machine that on hand and you aren't local administrator, you can just press the check for updates button, and there's the update. It's installing, I think, on the machine. Yeah, we can see the traffic, the HTTPS traffic now. It pulls the PSexec file and hopefully installed it. Yeah, there's an error because we tried it before, but that should be fine. And now we should be able to use netexec. 1 second, 13. I'll switch out the users. And the password. And we have compromised the machine. There is pwned, we are administrator. Yes. And it fully worked. fortunately. Perfect. So, yeah, I think this is it. We have a thank you slide for listening. Yeah, to extend, right? Perfect.
Yep.
Thank you all for listening, and thanks for coming to our talk.
Thanks.